They say the only thing Superman can't outrun is bad writing and studio executives. But what if this time, even truth, justice, and a new James Gunn cinematic universe can't save him? Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast where we dig through pop culture's glittery surface to uncover the hard questions, uncomfortable realities, and, occasionally, high-stakes box office disasters in the making. And today, our question might have capes flapping in terror across Hollywood Boulevard. What if the new Superman movie fails again? That's right, not underwhelms, not earns polite reviews, but fails. Commercially, critically, culturally. Falls flat in the age of superhero fatigue, meme-based attention spans, and cinematic universes collapsing faster than Krypton's crossed. Because here's the thing, Superman 2025, directed by James Gunn and starring David Corenswet as the fresh-faced Clark Kent, is not just another tentpole movie. It is a resurrection, a prophecy, a Hail Mary pass thrown from the shattered remains of the DC Extended Universe into the bleachers of audience goodwill. It is also the most expensive therapy session Warner Bros. Has ever paid for, coming in at a reported $225 million production budget with another $150 million expected from marketing, international rollouts, and, reshoots in case the first test screening includes the phrase, "This feels like CW." And this is not just about one movie. If you squint hard enough, you can see the entire DC cinematic slate. Supergirl, Batman the Brave and the Bold, Swamp Thing standing behind Superman like nervous wedding guests at a cursed ceremony, waiting to see if the groom makes it out alive. Now, why does this matter? Why does one man in red underwear carry the hopes of a failing studio, a fractured fandom, and the future of blockbuster cinema? Because Superman was supposed to be easy, the most iconic hero, the original, the blueprint. You'd think making him work on screen would be like baking cookies from a box. Follow the instructions, add some heart, avoid Zack Snyder. But history tells a different story. We've watched Superman crash more often than he's flown. From Superman 3 to Superman Returns to the infamous mustache incident in Justice League, this character's cinematic record is less Man of Steel and more Man of Studio mismanagement. So today, we ask, what if this one, the fresh start, the bold new vision, also fails? What if James Gunn's earnest, optimistic Superman doesn't resonate with audiences? What if Gen Z says he's too corny? What if TikTok mocks the costume, Rotten Tomatoes drops below 50, and #FireGun starts trending by opening weekend? What does that mean for Warner Bros., for superhero movies, for the concept of heroism in film itself? Because if Superman can't succeed in 2025, we might need to accept a darker truth. Maybe the world doesn't want to be saved anymore. Not by a guy in spandex, not by hope, and definitely not by a studio that once gave us Morbius. Okay, that was Sony, but spiritually, same energy. Coming up next, we dive into the staggering financial stakes riding on Superman 2025 and why Warner Bros. Might be just one box office bomb away from trading their capes for bankruptcy lawyers. Let's talk about the stakes. The real-world, bottom-line financial cliff that Warner Bros. Discovery is staring over right now, and why Superman is their only hope for not falling headfirst into the flaming abyss of yet another cinematic failure. Superman 2025 has a reported production budget of $225 million. That's before marketing, before international distribution, before whatever TikTok influencer campaign they're cooking up to convince teenagers that truth, justice, and the American way are cool again. Add another $150 million for global promotion, and you're looking at a ballpark figure of $375 million just to get this cape off the ground. But in Hollywood math, breaking even isn't enough. Studios want return. They want dominance. They want to shatter records, not hearts. So when insiders say this movie needs to make at least $700 million worldwide to be considered a success, they're not exaggerating. That's the bare minimum to prove that James Gunn's rebooted DC universe has liftoff potential, and isn't just another ambitious $700 million apology letter to fans. Why all the pressure? Because Warner Brothers Discovery is already up to its eyeballs in debt. Mergers, layoffs, mass content deletions, HBO Max becoming simply Max, like it's a tech bro who discovered minimalism after burning through his third startup. This studio has hemorrhaged goodwill, canceled Batgirl after filming was complete, and basically begged audiences to take The Flash seriously, only for it to crash harder than a Kryptonian pod piloted by toddlers. So this Superman movie, it isn't just a film, it's a financial life raft. It's Warner's last shot at proving that a connected universe of DC heroes is still viable, still bankable, still not just a chaotic graveyard of good intentions and Reddit arguments. Enter James Gunn, the man who turned a talking raccoon into an international icon. The guy who gave us Guardians of the Galaxy, Peacemaker, and the phrase, "I'm Mary Poppins, y'all." If anyone can resurrect Superman with sincerity and style, it's him. Which is exactly why the pressure on this film is insane. And let's not forget, the casting of David Corenswet and Rachel Brosnahan isn't just about fresh faces. It's about signaling toward classic optimism, toward wholesome charm, toward the idea that Superman can once again stand for something other than existential dread and slow-motion destruction porn. But optimism doesn't pay back debt. A charming Superman won't magically make shareholders happy if the box office returns are closer to Shazam 2 than the Batman. If this movie doesn't land, and I mean really land, with critics, fans, and especially the elusive four-quadrant audience, then we're not just talking about a film that flops. We're talking about the implosion of DC Studios' entire roadmap. We're talking canceled spin-offs, Supergirl put on ice, Batman recast before filming, Green Lanterns vanishing again like a rebooted fever dream. We're talking a scenario where Warner stops trying to build a cinematic universe and retreats into the safety of cheap streaming content, endless Joker sequels, and the occasional Elseworlds experiment. In other words, if Superman falls, he might take everyone with him. Coming up next, let's fly back through the bumpy history of Superman's past screen appearances and ask the hard question: has the Man of Steel always been too heavy for Hollywood to carry?
It is a bird. It is a plane. It is another Superman reboot, dragging a franchise's hope behind it like a cape stuck in a revolving door. Let's rewind, shall we? Because to understand why the pressure on Superman 2025 feels like it's balancing a skyscraper on a paperclip, we need to fly through Superman's cinematic past, and it's not all soaring triumphs. It's mostly crash landings, with a few stylish nosedives for good measure. Start with Superman Returns, 2006. Brandon Routh was charming, the suit was shiny, the score was nostalgic, but it felt like watching a really expensive museum exhibit. It made $391 million globally on a $204 million budget, which sounds decent until you factor in marketing costs and that no one walked out of the theater thinking, "Wow, I cannot wait for Superman Returns 2, now with emotion." The sequel? Cancelled. The franchise? Immediately shelved. The studio? Quietly pretended it never happened. Fast forward to Man of Steel, 2013. A gritty reboot. Zack Snyder brought us a Superman who brooded like Batman and punched like Hulk on Red Bull. The result? $670 million worldwide. A solid number, yes, but not the billion-dollar triumph Warner Bros. Hoped for after handing Snyder the keys to the Kryptonian kingdom. More importantly, it kicked off the infamous Snyderverse, a cinematic universe that promised grandeur, delivered confusion, and eventually imploded under the weight of its own grayscale seriousness. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice followed. Here was the big one. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all in one film. A dream lineup. Until you realize they spent half the movie being sad, the other half punching each other in the face, and then everything stopped because their moms shared a first name. Martha, the punchline heard round a world. Financially, it brought in $874 million. Not bad, but not enough. Warner had spent Marvel-level money expecting Marvel-level returns. And when audiences walked out more confused than elated, the foundation cracked. This was supposed to be DC's Avengers moment. Instead, it was the cinematic equivalent of showing up to the Super Bowl with a fog machine and a vague idea of how football works. By the time we got to Justice League 2017, the wheels were not just coming off, they were scattered across 5 different time zones. A director change, a mustache disaster, a Frankenstein cut of a movie that pleased no one and spawned an online movement more devoted than most organized religions. Hashtag Release the Snyder Cut became less of a plea and more of a war cry. And you know what? They released it. In 2021, we got Zack Snyder's Justice League. 4 hours, 1 ratio, all seriousness. It was better, but it wasn't profitable. It didn't save the universe. It didn't undo the past decade of brand damage. So, what does all this mean? It means Superman, the most iconic superhero in history, has not had a single, unqualified, universally praised box office slamming film in the last 40 years. Not since Christopher Reeve flew with charm and confidence in the 1970s and early 80s has the character been universally beloved in theaters. And that's where the myth of the Superman curse comes in. Not the tragic actor curse, the real one. The Hollywood creative curse. The idea that Superman is just too difficult to modernize, too sincere for cynical audiences, too powerful to write compelling stories around, too alien to feel relatable, too good. Studios keep trying to make him darker, moodier, more brooding, thinking that'll make him relevant. But maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't that Superman is too square. Maybe it's that Hollywood keeps sanding down what made him inspiring in the first place. So here we are again. Another new face in the cape, another massive budget, another fresh take, and a fan base split between people hoping for magic and those sharpening their Rotten Tomato scores in advance. Coming up next, we dive into the what-if scenario. What actually happens to DC, Warner Bros., and pop culture at large if Superman 2025 pulls an Icarus and plummets straight into box office oblivion? Stay tuned.
Let's play out the nightmare scenario, shall we? It is July 2025. Theaters are packed, or at least they're supposed to be. James Gunn's Superman has arrived. The trailers were sleek. The posters showed a classic red and blue silhouette floating above Metropolis. The fan forums buzzed with cautious optimism. DC diehards clutched their Funko Pops in hope. And then, opening weekend comes in at $48 million. Not bad, but not good, and certainly not $225 million budget plus marketing good. By week 2, box office numbers are plummeting faster than Krypton's GDP. Word of mouth isn't toxic, it's just confused. Critics call it ambitious but uneven, more heart than heat vision, and a film that seems embarrassed to star Superman. Audiences shrug. Casual viewers say, "Is this part of the other Justice League thing?" Snyder fans start hashtags. Again. The global gross taps out at $420 million. The studio accountants get cold sweats. The PR team goes radio silent. And the DC Universe reboot that was supposed to relaunch a decade of interconnected blockbusters suddenly looks like the world's most expensive blank slate. Now, let's be clear, this is not a far-fetched dystopia. This is a very plausible outcome. Because breaking even in the modern superhero economy isn't enough. You do not spend nearly $250 million to walk away with polite applause and decent ticket sales. Studios want headlines. They want billion-dollar returns. They want memes, cosplays, TikTok dances, theme park rides, and branded cereal within 48 hours of the premiere. If Superman merely does okay, it is a failure. And what happens then? For starters, the entire DC studio strategy gets thrown into chaos. James Gunn, who wrote and directed this film, suddenly looks less like the visionary savior of DC and more like the guy who should have stuck to talking raccoons and sad trees. Peter Safran, his co-CEO, has to go on a damage control tour. Investor calls turn into interrogation sessions. Why did we bet the farm on another Superman movie, they ask, while quietly Googling, "Can Batman save us again?" The upcoming DC slate,
Supergirl, The Authority, Green Lantern, Booster Gold gets frozen in place. Executives start using phrases like strategic reassessment, which is code for panic and wait. Filming delays, budget cuts. Writers are told to make it more grounded, which in studio speak means less costumes, more sad people walking slowly. Meanwhile, over at Warner Bros. Discovery, which is already teetering under billions in debt and a trail of canceled projects, the failure reverberates like doomsday just punched their balance sheet. Internal memos start floating around suggesting a pivot to safer IP. Harry Potter spin-offs, more Game of Thrones, reality shows involving celebrities eating bugs. Anything but another expensive attempt at superhero grandeur. And the talent? David Corenswet, the new Superman, suddenly finds himself in that awkward limbo. Too famous to be unknown, not famous enough to be untouchable. He does one serious indie movie, 3 streaming thrillers, and a surprise turn in a romantic comedy set in Vermont. Rachel Brosnahan, playing Lois Lane, rebounds just fine because she has range, Emmys, and the ability to deliver biting dialogue without looking like she's trying to solve a riddle. But the damage to the DC brand is the real crater. This wasn't just supposed to be a movie, it was a launch pad, a cultural reset, a resurrection. And instead, it becomes another entry in the growing spreadsheet of why does Superman keep breaking our hearts? Up next, we dive into the fans, the critics, and the echo chamber, where art meets algorithm. Because if Superman crashes, the fallout isn't just financial, it's cultural. Stay with us.
Let's talk about the people who will have the loudest opinions if Superman falls flat. Critics, fans, and, of course, those professional contrarians with YouTube channels called things like Cinematic Catastrophes and Nerd Rage Unleashed. Picture this. The early critic reviews trickle in on Rotten Tomatoes. A lukewarm 62%. Not a disaster, but certainly not a triumph. The consensus? Heartfelt, but tonally uneven. Translation: we don't want to be mean to James Gunn, but we're also not about to lie for him. A few critics go further, calling the film a charming mess, or the product of a franchise stuck between rebranding and regurgitating. Suddenly, think pieces erupt like popcorn in a microwave. Is Superman still relevant? Is the cape dead? Was Snyder right all along? Meanwhile, the Snyderverse loyalists, those tireless digital foot soldiers, don't even wait for the second act. They're locked and loaded before the first screening. They post screenshots comparing Corenswet's posture to Henry Cavill. Mid-flight, mid-tier, one post says, with 30,000 likes. Hashtag Restore the Snyderverse trends again. Someone digs up a deleted tweet from Gunn where he once said Batman Returns was overrated. Now he's a heretic. And then there are the general audiences, the people who actually buy tickets. They aren't angry, they're just indifferent. Some liked it, some thought it was okay. Others say they'll catch it on streaming. And when the most common review from paying customers is, "I guess it was fine," the marketing department goes into cardiac arrest. This is where things get existential for Warner Bros. Discovery. See, Marvel may have its issues, and boy do they, but they have loyalty, familiarity, characters people can name while half asleep. DC, they are always selling themselves as a reboot, a reinvention, a desperate date who keeps changing their hairstyle and asking, "Do you like this version of me?" So, if Superman flops, it's not just a bad quarter for the company. It's another blow to DC's credibility. Audiences stop trusting them. Why invest in a new character if the studio's just going to reset it again in 3 years, they ask? Right before opening Disney Plus and rewatching Loki Season 2. Now let's talk about industry insiders. Hollywood has the memory of a goldfish, but the spite of a divorce lawyer. When a project fails, even slightly, executives sharpen their knives with astounding speed. Studio boardrooms light up with post-mortem PowerPoints titled, "Where did Superman go wrong?" One slide just says, "Cape fatigue?" Another suggests, half-jokingly, a full reboot starring a Gen Z Superman who's a social media influencer by day and fights climate change by night. The worst part?
someone greenlights it. And this failure doesn't stay confined to the DC universe, it ripples. Suddenly, any film with a cape, a mask, or a budget over $150 million gets a second look. That new X-Men movie Disney had queued up, now it needs rewrites. Sony starts wondering if the Madam Web debacle was a warning sign, not an outlier. Even Amazon starts worrying about its The Boys spin-offs. Are we parodying something no one cares about anymore? It is a chain reaction of panic disguised as strategy. But let's not forget the fans, those of us who wanted this to work. The people who saw the first Superman film in 1978 and still believe a man can fly. The comic nerds, the cosplayers, the little kids who wore capes made out of towels. We are the ones left to pick up the emotional debris. Because when Superman fails, it does not just hurt a brand, it breaks a myth. Coming up, the bigger picture. What does a failed Superman say about our culture, our entertainment, and the idea of heroes in a world that increasingly laughs at sincerity? Stay tuned.
Let's zoom out for a moment. If Superman fails, again, we're not just talking about a misfire at the multiplex. We are witnessing a cultural moment where the last son of Krypton, once the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way, is politely asked to leave the pop culture party. Why? Because sincerity is out and irony is in. Imagine telling a room full of studio execs that audiences are tired of superheroes. You'll get scoffs, maybe even a condescending, "We've heard that before." But here's the thing. It's not that people hate heroes, they just hate being preached to, CGI'd at, and force-fed franchises like they're on some sort of corporate content trip. And nobody gets fed more than Superman. This guy is the original superhero blueprint. He's the mold. And yet every decade we return to the same question. Why can't we get him right? He is too boring, too powerful, too goody-goody, too much of a Boy Scout. The truth is, Superman is hard to write in an era where edgy anti-heroes sell better than noble icons. You can almost hear executives in pitch meetings asking, can we make him more morally gray? Maybe he vapes. Let's look at the marketing side now, because this is where desperation gets dressed up as optimism. Picture Times Square in July. Billboards everywhere. Truth, justice, tomorrow. It's bold, it's clean, it's hopeful. But by opening weekend, the tone shifts. The PR push becomes defensive. Suddenly, headlines read, "Why Superman doesn't need to be a billion-dollar blockbuster," or "James Gunn isn't worried about the box office, he's focused on the fans." Translation, we see the writing on the wall, and we're already rewriting the post-mortem. Back in the studio, internal memos are circulating. The words streaming pivot, limited damage, and brand rehabilitation start appearing in bold. Contingency plans go into motion. Executives call emergency meetings with HBO Max, to discuss how fast they can spin Superman into a prestige miniseries. You know, something grounded, adult, and emotionally resonant, where Clark Kent's biggest enemy is not Lex Luthor, but PTSD and zoning laws in Metropolis. The merchandising side, meanwhile, quietly panics. Stores are sitting on pallets of Superman action figures that were supposed to fly off the shelves. Retailers start bundling him with discounted Batman toys like a buy-one, get-one traumatized vigilante deal. And then comes Comic-Con. James Gunn, ever the showman, walks on stage to a polite but noticeably restrained applause. Gone are the raucous cheers and fan tattoos in his honor. He jokes about the box office numbers, says it's not about the money, it's about the story. The crowd smiles, but somewhere deep inside, everyone knows we've been here before. And critics? Oh, the critics. They pounce like hawks spotting a wounded franchise. Long essays drop on The Atlantic, Vulture, and Polygon with titles like "Why Superman No Longer Works in a Post-Snap World" or "How Hope Became Cringe." Subreddits erupt in analysis and blame. One user writes, "Maybe he should have just punched a climate change denier or something. Then Gen Z would have showed up." But perhaps the most damning reaction comes not from the loudest voices, but from the silence. The general public simply moves on.
The film drops out of trending topics in 2 days. TikTok gives it a passing glance, then returns to debating whether Inside Out 2 is Pixar's comeback. Superman doesn't trend, he drifts. And that's the real danger. Not failure, but apathy. Because when the world stops caring about Superman, not loving, not hating, just ignoring, that's when we know the cape has lost its wind. Coming up next, what happens to DC as a whole when their big red hope turns blue again? Does Warner Bros. Double down or finally face the music? Stick around.
So here we are, hovering over the smoldering crater of Superman's latest crash landing, and now it's time to talk about the wider blast radius. Because if Superman falls again, he's not falling alone. He's pulling the entire DC Studios ecosystem down with him like a red-caped anchor. Let's start with the boardroom at Warner Bros. Discovery, a place that now resembles a bunker more than a movie studio. There's no sunlight in those Zoom calls, only shareholder anxiety and the persistent tapping of CFOs calculating how many Batmobiles they need to sell on eBay to make up the losses. Remember, Superman wasn't just supposed to be a hit, he was supposed to be a signal. This is the new DC, the clean slate, the "we finally figured it out" era. Instead, you get panic. You know how dominoes work, right? First, Superman underperforms. Then suddenly, the confidence in the entire DCU reboot wobbles. Think about it. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, was scheduled to follow. Now, it gets delayed or quietly demoted to streaming. The Brave and the Bold, the big new Batman reboot, that script suddenly needs more time. Projects like Booster Gold or The Authority, poof, they go the way of Batgirl. Creative differences, they'll say. Strategic realignment, the press release will read. But in reality, it's retreat. And the talent? The talent gets squirrely fast. Actors talk, directors whisper. Word gets around, DC's a mess again. Agents start steering their clients away. Nobody wants to be the next name attached to a billion-dollar corpse. Even David Corenswet, poor guy, finally gets his breakout role and ends up the face of another failed franchise. That's not a cape on his shoulders, it's a branding liability. Meanwhile, over at Marvel, Kevin Feige smiles gently. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't need to. He just subtly greenlights Spider-Man 4, drops a teaser for Fantastic Four, and lets the algorithm gods handle the rest. DC once again becomes the cautionary tale at every film school. A PowerPoint slide titled, "How Not to Relaunch a Cinematic Universe 101." Now let's talk about the ripple into fandom, which is never quiet and rarely forgiving. James Gunn fans defend the movie passionately. It was misunderstood, too artistic for normies. While the hashtag Restore the Snyderverse crowd pops champagne and uploads 10-minute videos titled, "We told you this would happen." Twitter, or X, or whatever Elon's calling it by then, devolves into chaos. People are ratioed, memes fly, someone inevitably posts that clip of Homelander awkwardly smiling while being booed. The sad irony? None of this is about Superman anymore. Not really. It's about identity, the fans' identity, the studios, the entire genres. Because Superman isn't just a guy who flies. He's supposed to be the cornerstone of heroism. If he can't make us care, what does that say about our appetite for heroes at all? And perhaps this is where things turn philosophical. The question begins to emerge not just in boardrooms or subreddits, but in pop culture discourse. Has the superhero era peaked? Have we, collectively, gotten tired of capes, cowls, and Kryptonian saviors? And if we have, what replaces them? Coming up, let's look at how critics, fans, and audiences might respond to another Superman flop, and whether this is a failure that just fades, or one that rewrites what it means to be a blockbuster hero.
Imagine opening day arrives. The red carpet has been rolled out, David Corenswet flashes that chiseled Kryptonian grin, James Gunn looks tired but hopeful, and the critics? Well, the critics are typing. The first reviews trickle in, then cascade like kryptonite rain. And the headlines? They sting. Man of mid. Gunn's Superman can't save the DCU. Heroic ambitions, flawed execution. DC still doesn't know who Superman is. You scroll Rotten Tomatoes, 58%. Fresh in spirit, maybe, but rotten in impact. The audience score starts high, then tanks by the weekend as the general public realizes they didn't buy tickets to inspiration. They bought 2.5 hours of tonal confusion, CGI rubble, and a villain who monologues like ChatGPT overdosed on Nietzsche. Then comes the online war. #Gungate begins trending. #Restore the Snyderverse surges again, louder, smugger. Snyder fans break out the same clips from Zack Snyder's Justice League they've been posting on loop since 2021, like ancient scrolls rediscovered. You see, they cry, this is what you gave up. Dark, gritty, operatic, Superman with a black suit and a frown. Meanwhile, Gen Z TikTok reviewers film themselves walking out halfway through, lips pursed, with captions like, "It's giving fiscal failure." Hot take videos flood YouTube. Why James Gunn's Superman failed. The death of the superhero film. Why Marvel will always win. Spoiler, none of them read the comics. But that's not the point. The point is, perception becomes reality. And perception spreads like wildfire in today's content economy. Now, if this were a decade ago, Warner Bros. Might have weathered it, let the critics sulk, count on the global box office, and release the Ultimate Edition on Blu-ray in 6 months. But in 2025, in the streaming era, in the TikTok minute-by-minute meme war, one bad weekend is all it takes to bury your $225 million tentpole in a shallow grave of sarcasm. And then there's James Gunn himself. Here's a guy who revitalized Guardians of the Galaxy, built a career on heart, irreverence, and found family arcs, and now he's facing critics calling him tone-deaf, stretched too thin, or worse, trying to MCUify Superman. His defenders rally. You didn't get the nuance. He was setting up a 10-year plan. You're comparing apples to Batman. But art doesn't get 10 years anymore, not with shareholders breathing down your neck. Not when the patience of your average moviegoer is shorter than a TikTok recipe for quinoa pancakes. And fans? They're just tired. Tired of being disappointed. Tired of defending studios that don't seem to know what they want. Tired of Superman, of all heroes, being the cinematic equivalent of a group project that never gets past the planning stage. What was supposed to be the bold new beginning of the DC universe becomes another reason for audiences to check out entirely. Next, we'll look beyond DC, at how Hollywood reacts when Superman fails again, and what it means for the future of shared universes, blockbuster budgets, and whether the superhero genre is finally wearing its cape out.
So now we zoom out. Because when Superman crashes, he doesn't just take down the DC universe, he sends tremors across the entire Hollywood landscape. Studio execs, normally the human equivalent of sharks in suits, suddenly start sweating soy lattes in their glass offices on Sunset Boulevard. Because if Superman, the golden boy, the archetype, the original IP, is no longer bankable, what is? In boardrooms across Los Angeles, a term starts popping up on whiteboards with terrifying regularity: superhero fatigue. Of course, superhero fatigue has been declared more times than Batman's parents have been shot. But this time, there's data. Real, gut-wrenching, multi-million-dollar data. And suddenly, the bubble looks ready to pop. Disney holds an emergency retreat in Burbank. Kevin Feige, still reeling from Eternals and Quantumania, wonders if Blade is really going to save Marvel's Phase 5. Spoiler, probably not. Meanwhile, Sony panics about whether it should even release Madam Web 2. Yes, somehow that exists in this dystopia. Universal considers calling up Fast and Furious again. What if Dominic Toretto gets superpowers? Just spitballing. But the big concern is this: if even Superman, the ultimate cinematic symbol of hope, truth, and box office stability, fails to inspire, what comes next? Studios begin pivoting. Executives look towards safer bets: horror franchises, true crime dramas, nostalgic reboots of sitcoms from the 1990s that nobody asked for.
Streaming platforms invest more in Korean thrillers and Swedish detective series. Netflix releases The Grit of Kal-El, a brooding Scandinavian Superman documentary shot in black and white and narrated entirely by Werner Herzog. A24 and indie darlings start booming again. Suddenly, a $20 million slow burn about grief and taxidermy, starring Florence Pugh and Carl Mescal, outperforms the latest Caped Crusader by a mile. The public appetite shifts toward the human, the strange, the grounded. Critics rejoice. Letterboxd thrives. And let's not forget the toys. Oh, the toys. Hasbro shelves the Superman action figure line. The Happy Meal deal with McDonald's gets quietly downgraded to a Justice League-themed salad. Merchandise sales plummet. No one wants to wear the red cape, not even ironically. DC Comics themselves? Back to basics. Print runs shrink. Digital first becomes the new norm. Writers are told to stop tying every storyline into the cinematic roadmap and just make good stories again. Imagine that! And amidst all this, Warner Brothers quietly begins issuing press releases about restructuring, re-envisioning, and leaning into our vast library of storytelling opportunities. Translation: layoffs, delays, and possibly trying to reboot The Matrix as an animated musical. At Comic-Con, the DC Hall H presentation is subdued. No laser lights, no thunderous applause, just a nervous James Gunn on stage, promising that Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow will be a very different kind of journey. Industry code for, please still care. But there's an opportunity hidden in the rubble too. Because sometimes, when a giant falls, the space it leaves behind is filled by something unexpected. Could this be the start of a more diverse, creative era in film? One less obsessed with franchises and more with filmmakers? Could the superhero genre evolve instead of dying? Coming up next, we'll explore what happens to the fanbase, especially the warring factions of Snyder loyalists, Gunn defenders, and exhausted normies, and whether Superman's stumble could actually open the door to a brighter, stranger cinematic future.
Let's talk fans, or rather, the tribes, because at this point, DC fandom isn't a single audience, it's a patchwork of ideological micronations, each armed with hashtags, grievances, and high-definition meme arsenals. The moment Superman 2025 flops, you can bet your last Funko Pop that X, goes full nuclear. The hashtags fly fast. Hashtag gun out. Hashtag restore the Snyderverse again. Hashtag let Batfleck cook. Not my Kal-El. First, the Snyder loyalists pounce. For years, they've warned Warner Bros. Not to abandon the brooding, operatic aesthetic of Zack Snyder's Superman. They see James Gunn's lighter, more optimistic tone as betrayal, Superman reimagined as a TikTok star in a cape. Now, with disappointing box office numbers and Rotten Tomatoes scores hovering in the 50s, they feel vindicated. Again. They organize. Again. Change.org petitions are circulated. Again. And once more, we see the digital equivalent of thousands of black-clad fans storming the gates with nothing but passion, perseverance, and limited edition steelbook collections. Then there's the Gun Defenders, a newer tribe, often younger, often fans of Guardians of the Galaxy, who believe James Gunn is the only one who can bring heart back to DC. They argue the movie was misunderstood, that it was critically ambitious, that it wasn't really about Superman flying, it was about him feeling like he could fly. You know the type. They post 20-minute YouTube essays with thumbnails showing Gunn's face glowing next to the words "tragic misreading" in impact font. There are tears, there are charts. And finally, there's the exhausted middle, the fans who just wanted a good movie. They're not loyal to Snyder or Gunn or Jeff Johns or whoever's ghostwriting WB strategy documents. They just wanted to bring their kids, eat popcorn, and not feel like they're being dragged into an ideological war every time a Kryptonian shows up on screen. They're the ones quietly muttering, "Can we just have a Superman movie that doesn't start a civil war in the replies?" The irony? Superman, the hero who was supposed to unite us, now divides us more than ever. Meanwhile, the press plays both sides. Variety writes a scathing post-mortem titled "The Last Flight of Kal-El: How Superman Crashed into Irrelevance." Rolling Stone runs a think piece called "Why the World May Not Need Superman, but Still Desperately Wants Him."
Forbes calculates the revenue losses in real time with live charts that look like a cryptocurrency collapse. But beyond the memes and punditry, there's something deeper going on. Superman failing isn't just a financial issue, it's symbolic. He was the original superhero, the blueprint, the ideal. When Superman doesn't connect, it suggests something profound about where we are as a culture. That maybe we're tired of symbols, or we no longer believe in perfect heroes, or maybe, just maybe, we've become so cynical that truth, justice, and a better tomorrow feel corny. And if that's true, then no filmmaker, Gunn, Snyder, Spielberg, Tarantino, can save him. So, where does that leave us? Coming up next, we'll break down the possible future paths for DC Films and Warner Bros. If Superman cannot anchor the universe, what or who can? Could a pivot to smaller, grounded characters actually rescue the brand? Or is it time to let the whole cinematic universe idea die and let heroes be weird, standalone, and glorious again?
So, Superman's latest cinematic resurrection crashes into a kryptonite wall of indifference, internet warfare, and box office failure. Warner Bros. Executives are sweating through their branded merch hoodies in boardrooms with names like The Fortress, wondering, what now? The first instinct, naturally, is to pivot. That's Hollywood's favorite move after disaster. Change course without admitting fault. And DC Studios, still carrying the bruises from The Flash, Black Adam, and Shazam: Fury of the Unwatched, is no stranger to emergency U-turns. Plan A is probably the ensemble Hail Mary. Yes, Superman failed, but maybe, just maybe, he's better as part of a team. Cue the dusty blueprints for Justice League re-rebooted, this time with a rotating cast of Gen Z-friendly heroes who tweet and talk mental health. Think Blue Beetle, Static Shock, maybe a Plastic Man of Color rebrand for maximum synergy. The idea is simple. If Superman can't carry the franchise, then he can be carried. But of course, that requires an enormous financial and creative gamble, again. Which brings us to Plan B, the Batmanization of everything. This one's straightforward. Take a lesson from Matt Reeves. Grit, noir, emotional trauma, and zero jokes. Critics love it. Audiences believe it's serious cinema even when someone's wearing a cape. So Warner might pivot hard into prestige territory. Less supervillains, more soliloquies. Less CGI, more shadows. Make Superman sad again, but this time intellectually sad. And if that fails, we enter Plan C, the streaming dump. That's right. Goodbye theatrical ambition. Hello HBO Max. Sorry, Max. Imagine a world where Superman becomes a limited miniseries. 8 episodes. Flashbacks to Kansas. Lois Lane gets an entire solo arc about investigative journalism in a dying democracy. Lex Luthor is reimagined as a Silicon Valley thought leader. The Man of Tomorrow becomes the star of Thursdays at 9. And of course, lurking in the shadows of every plan is Plan D, the IP fire sale. At some point, the Warner Bros. Discovery debt math gets so ugly that they just license Superman out like an aging theme park mascot. Netflix does a gritty Elseworld Superman from a parallel Earth where he's a bartender. Amazon commissions a Kal-El origin story set entirely on Krypton with 5 minutes of baby launch in the finale. Apple buys the rights to make Lois Lane a sentient Siri and pairs her with Clark in a rom-com about work-life balance. But behind all the pivoting, there's one looming truth. If Superman fails again, nobody's safe. Not Wonder Woman, not Green Lantern, not even the Bat. Because if the hero, the one who started it all, cannot survive this moment in pop culture, then what does that say about the rest? It means superhero fatigue isn't just real, it's terminal, at least for the big blue Boy Scout. And yet, in a strange way, that might be the best thing to happen to DC. Because when everything breaks, you're free to build weird again. Coming up next, what if failure is freedom? Could a collapsing cinematic universe clear the way for smaller, stranger, more soulful stories? What if DC stops trying to be Marvel and starts being something else entirely? Now let's imagine the rubble, the cinematic crater where Superman 2025 once stood proud in IMAX, and Warner Bros. Looking into it like Ozymandias surveying the broken statue in the sand. The conventional wisdom says, rebuild, relaunch, rebrand. But here's a radical notion. What if they don't? What if, in the aftermath of Superman's fall, DC says, you know what? No more connected universes, no more multi-phase launch slates, no more mid-credits cameos teasing projects that will never happen. Instead, they lean into chaos. Controlled chaos, beautiful, auteur-driven chaos. They let weirdos run wild with their IP. Imagine a claymation bizarro film directed by Charlie Kaufman, a horror-tinged Zatanna project by Ari Aster, where spells misfire and no one leaves the theater unscathed, a black-and-white Lex Luthor courtroom drama written by Aaron Sorkin, where Superman is never seen, only mentioned in testimonies. Let the freak flags fly. Because if there's one thing audiences are craving in a post-Marvel phase Infinity world, it's not another shared universe spreadsheet. It's risk. And here's the ironic twist. Superman's failure could be what finally sets DC free. Free from Marvel envy. Free from corporate micromanagement. Free from the exhausting need to please everybody. In this new frontier, a filmmaker walks into Warner Bros., says, I want to do a version of Superman where he's the villain, but it's a love story, and instead of being laughed out of the building, they get greenlit. Because at this point, why not? The box office landscape has shifted. Franchises aren't built over a decade anymore, they're built in the TikTok reactions during opening weekend. IP is no longer sacred, it's pliable. It's weird clay to be molded by someone bold enough to not care about Rotten Tomatoes. And that's where real art hides. Superman, of all characters, was always about hope. Maybe that hope doesn't lie in opening weekend numbers, but in the long tail of cultural influence. Maybe the next generation won't remember how much Gunn's film grossed, but how a single, inspired reinterpretation brought them back to the idea of heroes, not as icons, but as humans in capes. So what if Superman fails? Maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what he needs to do. Coming up in our final segment, the long arc of the superhero myth, how even the greatest icons fall, and why that's not the end, but the rebirth. Because if Superman can't fly right now, maybe he's meant to walk among us again, where real stories happen.
Let's zoom out for a moment. Beyond budgets, beyond Rotten Tomatoes scores, beyond the hashtags and studio memos, what does the rise and fall of Superman really mean? To understand that, we have to talk about myth. Because Superman, more than any other modern character, isn't just a superhero. He's our 20th century Zeus, our Moses in a cape, our sun god made flesh in red boots. He was created during the Great Depression, a time when the world desperately needed someone indestructible. And over the decades, he's been reinvented, rebooted, reimagined, always trying to stay relevant, always trying to save someone. But now, in 2025, the question we face isn't just, can Superman succeed at the box office? It's, do we even believe in Superman anymore? Think about it. Superman is honest, earnest, naive. He tells the truth. He works a day job. He helps strangers just because he can. In a time when irony is our currency and sarcasm our national language, when heroes are morally gray and trauma-driven and snarky, Superman is sincere, which might make him the strangest character in the modern pantheon. And therein lies the problem. Hollywood knows how to market a charming anti-hero, a flawed genius, a reluctant savior. But a man who's already good? That's terrifying to screenwriters and executives alike. Because where's the arc? That's why so many modern Superman films try to fix him. They add darkness, they give him a temper, they question his loyalty to Earth. They say, what if Superman's the real threat? And sure, those are interesting takes, but maybe the answer isn't to deconstruct him. Maybe it's to embrace him for what he is, a moral compass in a world that desperately needs one. Maybe the failure of yet another Superman movie isn't a problem with the character. Maybe it's a mirror reflecting who we are. Do we still want a hero who doesn't kill,
doesn't lie and doesn't quit? Or have we, as audiences, become so cynical that we only cheer for gods with grudges? If that's true, if we've outgrown Superman, it says a lot more about us than it does about him. But here's a twist. The most powerful myths don't fade. They hibernate. They wait until the world needs them again. And when that happens, when the noise dies down and the ironic heroes fade and the world feels dark and lost, maybe that's when someone red and blue walks out of the shadows again. Not to punch a villain, not to save the universe, but just to say, it's okay, I've got you. And that might be the moment when we finally remember why he mattered. Stick around, because in our closing segment, we'll ask the ultimate question. Is it time to let Superman rest, or is this just his intermission before the next great leap into the sky?
So, is it time? Time to shelve the cape, lock up the Fortress of Solitude, and let Kal-El retire to some quiet corner of pop culture, maybe become a trivia answer in future bar quizzes? There's a growing chorus in Hollywood and online that says yes, that says the character is too rigid, too clean-cut, too old school for modern tastes, that Superman has had his shot, multiple shots, and maybe it's time we gave the stage to newer, more relatable heroes. You can see the logic. In a cinematic landscape where Spider-Man wrestles with anxiety, Batman with trauma, and Deadpool with everything else, a hero who never lies, never kills, and always chooses the high road can feel like an alien not just from Krypton, but from another era entirely. Superman doesn't brood, he doesn't tweet angrily, he doesn't have a complex past he's trying to atone for. He just wants to do the right thing, which, bizarrely, is what makes him such a hard sell. Think of it this way. If Superman were created today, executives would laugh him out of the pitch room. You mean he's an invincible, invulnerable alien who was raised in Kansas by wholesome parents and now writes journalism by day and saves the planet by night? No thanks. We're looking for more edge. Does he vape? Can we make him sarcastic? But maybe that's exactly why we need him now. Because in a culture addicted to grit and trauma, Superman offers something dangerously radical: hope. Hope that power doesn't have to corrupt. Hope that someone with godlike abilities might still choose compassion. Hope that when given a choice between vengeance and mercy, someone might pick mercy every time, and not because it's strategic, but because it's right. If Superman fails again, it might not mean he's broken. It might mean the world just isn't ready to believe in him right now. But guess what? Superman doesn't care if we believe in him. He believes in us. He always has. And maybe, just maybe, the real question isn't what if Superman fails again. The real question is, what if this time he doesn't? What if, against all odds, James Gunn pulls off the impossible? What if audiences rediscover what it feels like to root for a hero who inspires rather than reflects, who uplifts rather than mirrors? What if Superman, real, unfiltered, unapologetically earnest, soars again? That's not just a box office win, that's a cultural moment. And maybe, just maybe, the world is finally tired of the darkness. Coming up next, we explore how a single blockbuster, good or bad, can reshape the entire superhero genre. From budgets to casting to which spandex suits get greenlit, we'll ask, can one Superman save them all, or drag the whole cape-clad industry down with him?
Let's talk butterfly effects. Because when a Superman movie flops, or soars, it doesn't just affect one corner of a cinematic universe. It shakes the entire ecosystem of tights, capes, and billion-dollar franchises. Every studio executive, every screenwriter clutching a multiverse outline, every actor praying to be cast as the gritty reboot of Plastic Man watches Superman's fate like Wall Street watches interest rates. Why? Because Superman is the cornerstone. If he crumbles, everyone else starts rethinking the foundation. Picture it. James Gunn's Superman underperforms. The opening weekend is meh. It trends on X, but for the wrong reasons. The memes outpace the ticket sales. Now, Warner Bros. Discovery has a problem.
Not just a PR problem, but a strategic one. Their whole DC slate was built around this film being the big bang, the universe launcher, the cornerstone. If the cornerstone cracks, well, everything above it starts to wobble. Suddenly, the Supergirl movie is no longer a sure thing. Batman, the Brave and the Bold, is quietly reevaluated. The Green Lantern series? Maybe next year. Wonder Woman reboot? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Investment dries up, development slow. Calls start pouring in from marketing departments asking things like, can we bring back Joker again? Or, what if Batman fought a multiversal serial killer version of Alfred? Because nothing breeds panic in Hollywood like ambition that doesn't pay off. On the flip side, if Superman succeeds, even modestly, it becomes the new blueprint. Studios study the tone, the cinematography, the dialogue. Suddenly, earnestness is back in vogue. Can we get a wholesome reboot of Aquaman, someone says in a meeting? What if we do a Power Girl movie, but like, emotionally resonant? Superman becomes the North Star again. Not because he makes $1 billion, but because he proves that sincerity isn't cinematic suicide. That audiences will show up for a story about hope, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. And that ripple extends beyond DC. Marvel watches closely. Remember, they're nursing their own wounds post-Quantumania and the Marvels. If Superman flies, Kevin Feige might look at his own upcoming lineup and whisper, maybe we go less multiverse and more heart. Even indie studios take notes. Streaming platforms smell nostalgia dollars. Superhero fatigue suddenly has a little breathing room. Hope, quite literally, becomes marketable again. Because make no mistake, Superman isn't just a character, he's a litmus test. He tests whether the audience is still willing to believe in something unironically noble. Whether we can be moved not by complexity or trauma, but by clarity of purpose, by goodness. And if we fail that test, if audiences reject it, mock it, walk away again, well then maybe it's not Superman who failed us. Maybe we failed him. Coming up next, let's get into the data. We'll dissect the early reviews, the box office projections, and the social media chatter already swirling. And we'll ask the big one. How much does online fandom really matter when it comes to a hero this iconic?
All right, let's put on our capes and slide into the numbers, because when it comes to Hollywood, hope may float, but revenue decides if it flies. As of now, box office projections for Superman 2025 are all over the place. Optimists at Warner Bros. Are whispering north of $700 million globally. Cynics say if it cracks $450 million, they'll pop champagne and quietly cancel the next 3 projects. But here's the key, no one actually knows. Because Superman is no longer just a movie. It's a referendum on DC, on James Gunn, on superhero cinema as a whole. Let's start with the early data leaks, those highly scientific YouTube thumbnails screaming, "Box office doom!" with a red arrow pointed at Cornsweat's forehead. Test screenings? Mixed. Some viewers say it captures the golden age spirit of Superman the movie, others say it's too sincere for today's audience. One viral comment, it's like Captain America without the snark. Depending on who you ask, that's either glowing praise or box office suicide. Now look at the tracking. Pre-sale tickets look decent, but not groundbreaking. A-listers like Rachel Brosnahan are doing the talk show circuit. Gunn is tweeting charming behind-the-scenes photos daily. But fan buzz? Divided. On one side, you've got the hopefuls, the folks who've been waiting years for a Superman who actually enjoys being Superman. They're making fan art, writing essays, saying things like, "He smiles, he helps people, this is what I missed." On the other, a brigade of terminally online skeptics. The Snyderverse faithful, the Henry Cavill was robbed contingent. These guys have spreadsheets, timelines, and probably a shrine to 2013 in their basements. They're not mad, no, they're disappointed, and they're organizing. Review bombing is already being planned on Reddit threads disguised as film forums. Hashtags like "Gunn fails again" and "Not my Clark" are drafted weeks in advance.
There's even a rumor that a dozen YouTube influencers will coordinate a Superman sucks video drop on opening weekend, complete with reaction faces and titles like The Worst DC Movie Yet. Now, does any of this matter? Here's the brutal truth. Yes and no. If audiences like what they see, online noise becomes white noise. Look at The Flash. It was hyped by the studio, loved by Tom Cruise for some reason, and still collapsed faster than a Kryptonian under red sunlight. Because hype can't save you if the vibe is off. But if the movie is good, really good, it can weather any storm. Even if review bombers come out in droves, even if TikTok teens say, "This is so cringe, bro," word of mouth will find a way. Because deep down, people still want to believe. The real risk isn't in the box office total, it's in the conversation. If Superman becomes shorthand for outdated, if critics say it's too vanilla, too naive, too slow, that perception will cling to it like static on a polyester cape. And perception, in Hollywood, is poison. Studios don't just count dollars, they count vibes. What's trending? What's the meme ratio? Are audiences ironic or sincere? If Superman becomes a punchline again, DC's master plan might die not with a bang, but with a shrug. Coming up, let's step inside Warner Bros. Discovery's war room. What's riding on this film behind the scenes? What secret contracts, sequel pitches, and branding schemes hinge on whether Superman saves the day or faceplants into the nearest CGI crater?
And now we step into the part where studio executives start lighting incense sticks, meditating in broom closets, and sacrificing test screening footage to the ghost of Christopher Reeve, because at this stage, the pressure is so thick you could cut it with a bat'leth. So what happens to the fans? Oh, the poor fans. Let's talk about the ecosystem of obsession that surrounds Superman. You see, Superman fandom isn't just a fan base, it's a geopolitical entity. On one side you have the purists. They want a Boy Scout in blue with a smile bright enough to blind Lex Luthor's bank account. On the other, you have the Snyder Bros, who believe Superman should brood like Hamlet, punch like Goku, and carry the psychological weight of an entire nation-state. And then there's Gen Z, who just wants a Superman who posts thirst traps on TikTok and has climate anxiety. If this movie tanks, it will not merely fracture the fandom, it will fracture the internet. Reddit boards will become minefields. X, formerly Twitter, always toxic, will be set ablaze by rage threads and conspiracy theories. Hashtags like #Fire James Gunn or #Recast Lois will trend every weekend. YouTubers will build entire careers ranting about the day Superman died again. And let us not forget the merchandisers. Walmart, Target, and Hot Topic will be left holding the kryptonite bag, full of Funko Pops and Superman boxers nobody wants. Clearance aisles become mausoleums to a franchise's broken promise. In parallel, Marvel will be watching like a hawk in a bathrobe, sipping coffee, saying, "Damn, maybe we're not the only ones messing up." But they won't celebrate, because here's the big twist. If Superman fails, it doesn't just hurt DC, it hurts superheroes as a genre. Studios may start asking, do people even want superheroes anymore? We saw what happened after the Marvels, Quantumania, and Shazam! Fury of the Gods. If Superman, the icon, the OG, the red-caped messiah cannot draw crowds, the message becomes clear. The cape era may truly be over. Coming up next, how a Superman flop could become a tipping point for the entire blockbuster economy, and why Hollywood might pivot back to, drumroll, rom-coms. Stay tuned.
So here we are, the industry-wide existential dread part of the story. Let's talk about what happens to Hollywood itself if Superman fails, not just as a movie, but as a symbol. Because Superman isn't just a guy in tights, he's the myth that launched 1,000 greenlights. If this film craters, the message is crystal clear. Audiences are done with legacy IP if it doesn't evolve.
Now imagine you're a studio executive in Burbank, standing in front of a giant whiteboard covered in superhero timelines, spin-off plans, streaming rights negotiations, and unread Slack messages from Jason Momoa. What do? First, you panic, quietly, behind a $7 oat milk latte. Then you pivot. You start whispering in meetings things like, should we do more grounded content? Or, what if we just bought another true crime docuseries? Because after Superman, if he cannot fly, the entire genre may be grounded, permanently. Studios might finally walk away from interconnected cinematic universes altogether. No more elaborate 10-year roadmaps ending in multiverse fistfights. Just films, standalone, director-driven, non-caped films. Enter the return of the mid-budget movie, the romantic comedy, the workplace drama, heck, maybe even a western. You'll see the rise of safe risks, projects that cost $40 million and make $80 million and don't have to fight internet mobs for survival. But wait, it gets weirder. Streaming giants, always lurking in the shadows with their algorithms and stress-testing tools, might smell blood. They've been waiting for theatrical to fumble. A Superman failure would be their Super Bowl. Netflix, Amazon, they might double down, offering to swoop in and buy broken franchises outright. Picture this. Superman, now reimagined as a prestige limited series. Clark Kent, a depressed freelance journalist navigating toxic newsroom politics in a post-truth world. Each episode opens with a therapy session and ends with Lex Luthor tweeting conspiracy theories. Directed by Noah Baumbach. Too far? Maybe. But in the vacuum left by a failed theatrical Superman, every pitch becomes plausible. Coming up next, we ask the unthinkable. If Superman fails again, could Warner Bros. Itself be broken up or sold? And what does it mean for the last 100 years of American pop culture? Keep listening.
Now let's talk nuclear fallout, Hollywood style. If this Superman movie collapses under its own cape, the shockwaves won't stop at the theater door. They'll slam straight into the executive suites at Warner Bros. Discovery, shaking the very foundations of a studio that once ruled the industry with Bugs Bunny and Bogart, Kubrick and Keaton. Because here's the truth, Warner Bros. Has bet the house on this film. This isn't just another tentpole, it's the tent itself. James Gunn was brought in not merely as a director, but as a messiah, a last-ditch savior with a whiteboard and a dream. A dream that started with Superman. And if that dream dies, so might the boardroom patience with anything that looks like risk. Let's say the movie barely scrapes past $400 million globally. That's far below expectations, a black eye on opening weekend, and a gut punch by week 3. Analysts start whispering write-downs. Industry trades begin dropping phrases like course correction and reassessing franchise strategy. Shareholders demand answers. And David Zaslav, Warner Bros. CEO, may start looking at James Gunn the way Lex Luthor looks at Krypton crystals: shiny, expensive, and inconvenient. Worse still, if Warner Bros. Has to report a major theatrical failure while still juggling billions in debt and dwindling streaming numbers, the wolves start circling. Wall Street types, private equity sharks, tech giants sniffing around like it's a yard sale at a collapsing studio. Apple, Amazon, Disney? They've all got war chests and algorithms. And Superman might just become a distressed asset. Imagine the irony. The most iconic hero in American pop culture, born during the Great Depression, now handed off during a corporate feeding frenzy in the age of content. Not because people didn't love him, but because studios failed him. That's what's at stake. This is about more than box office receipts. It's about legacy. And the risk that one more faceplant drags down an entire century of brand equity with it.
But let's say the studio somehow survives, albeit bruised. Where do they go next? Back to Batman? Again? Reboot Harry Potter? Again? Spin off the Joker's second cousin in black and white? These aren't jokes. They're actual proposals that end up in boardroom decks if the Superman revival fails to inspire. And just when you think it can't get more cynical, the AI bros show up. What if we train a model on all Superman movies and generate the perfect one, they ask? What if we remove actors, writers, directors, and just give the audience exactly what they want? Which is ironic, considering studios have been trying to do that for 15 years and still can't agree on what audiences want. Up next, the closing chapter. We'll take one final leap off the Daily Planet rooftop and ask, if Superman truly crashes again, is it time to put him to rest? Or can something new rise from the rubble of so many failed reboots? Stay tuned.
So here we are, the final stretch of our cinematic inquisition. After decades of sequels, soft reboots, bold visions, safe bets, wild fan campaigns, and more Superman casting debates than there are actual kryptonite colors, we've arrived at the ultimate question. What if the new Superman movie fails again? Let's be honest, it's not just about box office anymore. It's about whether the very idea of Superman still works in 2025. Because Superman, in many ways, is a relic from a more optimistic age. A hero born from the Great Depression, refined during World War II, and mythologized in Cold War America. He stands for truth, justice, and, depending on the era, the American way, or something slightly more legally ambiguous. But today, in an age of fractured politics, meme-based morality, and a generation raised on anti-heroes and emotional trauma as plot device, does the big blue Boy Scout still fly? And more to the point, do audiences still care? If this movie stumbles, the discourse won't be about missed opportunities. It'll be about cultural obsolescence. Pundits will write eulogies titled "Why Superman Had to Die." Think pieces will dissect how irony killed idealism. TikTokers will joke about how even Superman couldn't save the DC universe. It will be a funeral parade in 4K. And yet, maybe, just maybe, there's something left in the tank. Because every time Superman has been counted out, after the death of George Reeves, after the awkward curl of Brandon Routh, after Zack Snyder's emo god version that split fans like the Red Sea, he's come back. He's the original reboot, the endless reinvention, the eternal immigrant story that somehow still resonates across generations. And maybe failure wouldn't be the end. Maybe it would be the beginning of something less grandiose but more grounded. Not a cinematic universe carved into 10-year roadmaps, but a return to real storytelling. Standalone films, character-first arcs. Maybe even a TV series with actual time to explore Clark Kent. Not just the cape, but the man beneath it. Maybe, and hear me out, we stop asking Superman to save the universe, and just let him save one person at a time. In the end, what's truly at stake isn't the DC Universe, Warner Bros., or even James Gunn's reputation. It's the idea that stories, big, earnest, hopeful stories, can still matter in a culture drowning in sarcasm and self-awareness. So what if the Superman movie fails? Then we reckon with what Superman really means. Not to brands, not to box offices, but to us. And maybe, just maybe, we finally give him the story he deserves. Not because it's profitable, but because we still believe a man can fly. Thanks for tuning in to What If Horizons.
If you liked what you heard, fly over to that subscribe button, heat vision that like, and leave a review faster than a speeding bullet. Next time we ask, what if AI-generated movies make superhero actors obsolete? Until then, up, and away.